Thank you for
I will give the community at large, whether you be on the big screen or here in the room, opportunities to speak throughout our conversations. Approval of the minutes. I want to talk about the minutes for a moment. I received them the other day, and I want to have a little bit of discussion about them. I think from my perspective, the minutes should only include the who, what, where, when, and how of the meeting. In other words, who attended, what time we had it, what day we had it, where it was, and how it was communicated. I think it ought to include recommendations that are made, any action items that are asked to be taken, and who's to do the action item and what time the action item is to be done by. And just if we have a general conversation, that's I think all we ought to talk about is just having a general conversation. I don't think we need to get into the he said, she said, they said details of our general conversations. And that's how I think our meeting minutes ought to be distributed. And that's for at least this committee. And I would recommend that for all of our committees, because 8 pages from the Agricultural Committee meeting last night, distributed 11:10 p.m. 8 pages of he said, she said, they said, I don't think is necessary, but I'll throw that out there. That's my perspective on how meeting minutes should be kept and distributed. Unless I hear anything to the contrary, that's how I'd appreciate that be done for this committee. Okay, moving on.
Just
on that. Wait a minute.
You hit us cold here, John. Thank you.
Okay.
I think we have a secretary and records minutes for one of our boards who is excellent. In fact, he's unfortunately he's retiring, and he is very detail oriented. And as a person who uses his minutes to go over not only current issues but past issues, it's invaluable to have what was discussed to some degree. Now,
isn't it recorded here?
Initially it wasn't, but we didn't do recording until the last 3 years. Yeah.
So we are recording it. If somebody was to need that historical data, they can always go back to the recording.
If you can find the recording, because it's not always easy to go back and find the recording. But I also hear what you're saying, that you don't have to get into, it's not a transcript.
Right, and that's the way it reads.
It's not a, court transcript of the, what exact, everything was said, but, and then the other thing is you don't leave to the discretion of the recorder any interpretations of what's being said. So you have to be careful of that.
Mm-hmm.
But that's why you review and read and approve the minutes. If you don't agree with something that was said in the minutes, you correct it. So I'm having a tough time trying to. I mean, it's valuable to have as much detail as possible, but I agree also that you can be overcome with detail.
Yeah, I mean, 8 pages at 11:10 last night in preparation for today's meeting. And it was just he said, she said, they said. And if I wanted to get into that level of detail, I can always watch the video. I mean, we're 2023 and it's costing taxpayers a substantial amount of money to have someone sit here in this room and record the transcript, so to speak. I mean, the meeting minutes had a discrepancy in there, which I think needs to be changed before we can approve it, but we'll get into that in a minute. But
if I could just add something for you guys. So when we started, it was during the pandemic, when we started using Zoom, March, May, whatever it was of 2020, every single one of the recordings, Sarah posts those to a YouTube channel. So all the recordings are available to a YouTube channel. And there's actually a playlist organized by the committees. So for instance, you can go to the planning board and you can see all the YouTube videos of the dates. You can go to the ordinance committee, etc. When the state passed its law relative to remote participation, it's actually a state law requirement that there's a transcript. So you see the closed captioning up on the screen, that's all automatically taking into account, that's being recorded, and those are filed with the town clerk's office. Now, there are sometimes it translates incorrectly, there's sometimes words that aren't quite right, that sort of thing, but there is an official transcript for every single committee meeting that is filed with the town clerk's office.
Okay, which begs the next question. Do we need paper transcriptions or summaries? What's the legality of these things that are online?
The legality is that they're filed with the town clerk's office. If you'd like a copy, you can ask the town clerk and she'd be happy to provide you a copy.
Of that?
Yes.
No kidding. Okay, so the question is then, do we need recording secretaries?
Well, that goes back to your minutes, and that's the general conversation that you're
That's
having.
my point.
I find the minutes valuable myself. I'd like to know what the individual people on committees are saying, because each person has a different expertise, each person has a different take on issues perhaps, and I'd like to know those people that we have appointed as a town board member to a board, a committee, or whatever. I'd like to know what their thoughts are. So I have no problem with minutes. I prefer them. And I'm not going to look up a YouTube channel and sit there and watch an hour and a half of people talking. I prefer to have something in my hand that I can refer back to another page and say, oh yeah, that's where this came from.
I agree with you, Terry, which goes back to what's the, if the things online are in fact the legal minutes, and I agree with Terry, I'd rather have a summary. Now,
They're not
summaries
the
are,
legal minutes, though.
summaries are,
They're not the legal minutes.
these are not?
No, those
Oh,
are.
they're not.
That's a required transcript of any
Ones we
remote
approve of.
participation.
The written ones.
So this is supposed to be the Cliff Notes version of,
Are the videos also
but
stored?
they're not Cliff
independently?
Notes
Yes.
versions if they're 6 or 8
Well, for the
pages long.
retention period.
Right.
That's the other dilemma.
I think it's 7 years.
I'm bringing it up for conversation. If we want to leave it the way it is, that's fine, but
There might
I
also
find it to
be
be-
a little bit of a middle ground. It's just a little less detail, a little,
Right.
more summarized and less
Right.
play by play.
Right.
So,
My challenge is, and I don't know Kim's schedule, but when we get the minutes,
mhm.
I mean, we're getting
Yeah.
them awfully late, and
I've been overwhelmed.
I imagine, I know
Yeah.
what you're doing, every time we turn around, it's
That's-
minutes from a
that's-
different
that's
committee.
to my
From
point.
Kim.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well,
my
Kim is
point.
also now working
Yeah.
half-time in my office, doing, important work with planning and zoning, so, and we're trying to find a secretary for the
Mhm.
zoning board, and so we are way understaffed, so I think that, everything she's doing is very timely, given the fact that we're asking her to do so much.
Well, my only issue is, I don't have a problem with the narrative of the minutes, it's more timing, if we can get that straightened out, as far as when they're issued, that would be how I would see things, John.
John, you said there was an error somewhere?
yeah, all right, well, let's close the topic of the meeting minutes. So we'll leave them as is then? That's what I'm hearing?
Well,
Try to shorten them
I
up
think Kim's
some?
hearing what we're saying, and maybe to her benefit, she doesn't have to get into quite as much detail.
Yeah.
I mean,
With the
I guess
caveat
you'd rather
that
give
it
us too much and not
summarizes
enough,
more.
Yeah.
Well,
rather than
I don't
he
want
sh-
to interpret what you
he
want.
said.
Mhm.
That's,
Yeah,
that's,
he said.
that is the problem.
You don't wanna leave it up to the secretary to make interpretation,
Mhm.
so let's keep going the way we are.
Okay.
going.
Yeah,
Pretty
I noticed a incorrection on the last meeting minutes, that it wasn't Ed Varno's property that was being complained against. He was complaining about an adjoining property to their property.
It's under the short-term rental thing.
Mhm.
Yeah, when we were having some brief conversations about that last week. Okay, any other comments? Moving on. So should we have an approval of the meeting minutes based on that one change?
Sure,
So
I said-
moved.
I'll make the motion.
Okay, all in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? So moved. All right, let's talk about solar ordinance update. Shauna passed around a modified version of our ordinance for consideration. And before we get into the details of that, Terry sent me an article the other day about a municipality that was assessing a fee for every acre of property that was being used as solar lands or solar arrays in a downstate community. And it begged the question for me, if they could do something like that, what is motivating us? Do we really want solar arrays in our community to begin with? And I think that's been a struggle that we've been challenged with here over the last few times we've gotten together. So I thought I would at least start our meeting with that conversation, just say, do we want solar arrays in our community? And when I talk about the arrays, I mean, other than the household, yeah, tier 1, I guess. Do we want tier 2, tier 3, and tier 4 solar arrays in our community? Do we think our community wants solar arrays in our community?
Are we going to be NIMBYs? Are we just going to shift the responsibility for sustainability to other communities?
Sustainability takes a lot of forms.
Absolutely, but I
And if downstate wants sustainability and upstate doesn't necessarily want the solar arrays, and again, I'm throwing it out for conversation.
The only real large chunks of property that would be able to be used for larger scale arrays is farmland. And do we want to protect farmland? As we say we do in our comprehensive plan. You know, reading through the Agriculture Advisory Committee meeting minutes to not quote directly minutes, but they never really came up with a definitive yes, no.
They didn't make a
But you read through it and there wasn't a lot of sentiment in favor of it. These guys are all people that operate farms or are engaged in agricultural activities in some manner. And, you know, you talked about taking good farmland and turning it into marginal farmland that may not be able to be brought back if the solar array goes away at some point in time. It just seemed to me that the bottom line of it to me was they weren't in favor of these arrays on agricultural property, and I agree with them. It's not a NIMBY thing, really. It's a put these facilities where they have the best chance of performing. Put them in the south, put them in the southwest where the sun shines a lot more than it does here. I mean, you can't see it right now out there. It's shining up there behind the clouds, but this area is just, solar is just not to me, without heavy government subsidy, it couldn't exist. So it doesn't make sense to me to have large scale stuff like that here, even if you have sheep grazing underneath it, which was another point they brought up, that the sheep overgraze and you wind up with not being able to sustain the herd. You have to bring food into them. So the argument of using it to keep the weeds down and all that, yeah, could be a little bit hollow.
And I'll piggyback on that. I truly believe Canandaigua is the chosen spot. And I think people come here and they want to come here because of the overall flavor of our community. And I think that the overall flavor of our community would become somewhat tarnished by large-scale solar arrays. You know, if we drive down New Michigan Road or you drive down Route 332 and you have these large solar array farms, does that impact the quality and character of our community? And I would argue that it does.
I think also one of the main problems is just a simple problem that we're addressing in this is that solar arrays are not by nature an agricultural activity. And it makes more sense to be putting them in, like we've basically addressed with this, the industrial and commercially zoned areas, which is where one would expect an attractive, large metal building of some kind, as opposed to within our scenic viewshed overlay, which is why they're not being allowed in the scenic viewshed overlay or any of these other areas. But there's only so much that we can do to prohibit them, but I think we've made it clear that we don't want to encourage them. At least I think we've addressed that already in the committee, so.
Let's address the point you just made. There's only so much we can do to discourage them.
Mhm.
What do you mean by that?
Well, some of them, I mean,
We're not mandated to have them.
the tier 4 ones, we could be. I mean, that's my understanding anyway, so, not that we'd have land for it, I don't think, but.
Let me address that.
Yes, please.
So typically through zoning is how you regulate, any of these types of uses. So for instance, the tier 4, and that's why this version has the restrictive covenants associated with the tier 4 to prevent the state from just coming in and saying, oh, Canandaigua doesn't have anything on their books to address tier 4, we're just gonna allow it to happen, right? Now that we have something on our books, or we would if this was adopted, this would say, okay, if you want to do tier 4, you have to get special approval through the town board, through the incentive zoning process is the only way that we would allow it. Make it very, very restrictive, right? And that is echoed with the regulations that the state put out in terms of tier 1, 2, 3, and 4, and even the information that was brought back to us by Bob LaCourse from the planning board, who actually attended this session and said, the state said, if you have nothing on your books relative to tier 4, we'll just come in and decide for you. If you do, we'll support whatever it is that you have on your books. So I think it is important. I think the point that Adeline's making is you need something on your books to regulate it. Right now, we had a good first start, I think, with the solar for a long time, and it's, we're still one of the few that have that provision. The planning board is prohibited from issuing an approval if there's a loss of valuable agricultural farmland. But this really tightens it up and defines where specifically you can allow either the tier 1, the tier 2, the tier 3, or the tier 4. And that's, you traditionally would do that through zoning.
Yeah, I wouldn't want to prohibit it entirely, because then we get into a situation that I lived through in Pennsylvania with mobile homes. It's considered exclusionary zoning. If you don't provide for that type of use in your town, the courts can come in and say, they're gonna tell you where to put it. Similar to what you could do with the type 4, but that, in that case, it would be the state. So I think, as Adeline said, I think if we restrict the districts in which we place the facilities, right now we've got the tier 3 and the CC, the LI and the I. Maybe we include the tier 2 in that too.
So the tier 2 is under 8 acres, right?
Correct.
Yes,
8 acres, but it's a lot more,
more areas.
a lot more districts
Yeah.
involved.
Yeah.
And another thing, I know that the reason the planning board said it got going down this trail is we saw so many applications come into the town that they were talking about, we're gonna save money in energy power, and the ones we have and the ones that we're looking at in the future possibly, we don't see a savings to the residents of Canandaigua.
Right.
Okay,
Not at all.
so I think, and the Ag Committee brought this up, that if it's a residential installation that's put on your house, it's to help you save money. Where if it's a solar farm, it's going back into the grid, and who knows if and when any of that one kilowatt will come back to the town in terms of any savings. So I think we should have districts set aside for it, but I think we can be very restrictive as to what those districts are.
Which is what this is kind of doing at this point, so, at least for the 3 and 4s tiers.
How does everyone feel
Well,
about Chuck's
about this.
idea of,
We haven't discussed that yet, so.
well, how about that? Let's talk about that for a minute. Do we want to put the tier 2?
It's up to 8 acres.
Yeah, my biggest concern, I mean, from a personal
Well, the-
perspective, I'm not, go ahead.
No, I was just gonna say, make sure you're checking the definition there, because
Right.
tier 2, it's not just 8 acres. And generate no more than 110% of electricity consumed on site over the previous 12 months. So it is for only on site.
That's limited.
It is very limiting.
Mhm. And my concern about, so so everybody's aware, we're talking about zoning maps here and where these would be allowed. And essentially, what color is the commercial? So essentially, the commercial and the industrial, are they, okay, the blue and the yellow is where we would be allowing the larger farms. And so my concern about taking away the tier 2 from basically everywhere else in town is the impact that it could have on private property owners. I personally, I'm not a fan of seeing solar installations anywhere, but it really spoke to me when somebody had indicated the amount of rental costs that a farmer can make from their land for solar versus just renting it out for agricultural use. So I really struggle with taking that completely away from everywhere. I don't want to see any more of them in the town either. And that 8-acre level, I'm a little more comfortable with, but I don't know. I go back and forth every day on it. That's why I hope we can have some community members sharing their views on it as well. So.
Do you think the issue of the farm community being still in favor of some type of solar is, it sounds reading their minutes that, like you said, Terry, I think we've got an answer from them that they're saying that it's really not, don't worry about the farmers.
Yeah.
I mean, we don't need solar to survive. I think that's what we're hearing, at least from the Ag Committee anyway.
And the farming community would actually come under tier 1 if it's really truly for on-site.
Or individual, yeah.
Which
You know, this on-site thing is, I have a neighbor that's got a horse barn, covered the roof with panels. He doesn't use that power at his house. Power comes in after the meter. He has no control over it. They monitor how much power he uses at his house and his barn. They look at what he generates. If he generates more than he's using, he gets credit. He's not using the power that's coming out of those panels at his house. You read this thing and it talks about 110% of what's consumed.
If it's
It
on his
doesn't mean
roof,
that it's
if
being-
it's on his roof though, this law would not pertain at all.
This is ground.
Oh, yeah, no, I'm just saying though.
Yeah.
Every one of these says, these first two say consumed, and it's like, it's not, it goes out. That kilowatt isn't coming in to power your toaster necessarily, so.
Somebody else's.
Yeah, you don't know where the electrons go out, who knows where they go. I mean, I just got nothing to do with it.
Right.
I'm just saying. How big is the town site? Whole campus here?
We've got, I think, 65-ish with the extra parcels.
Acres,
Approximately.
65 acres.
With the
so
wetland and the other, and then down there.
It'll be about an eighth of this whole campus here. You'd be saying 8 acres just for a scale scope. Yeah, you hate to make rules for people that may have a totally different opinion, but that's what we're charged with. So,
I really would encourage you to do something, because the
Oh, yeah.
existing law,
well, I agree.
we're
that-
getting applications now, you know.
Yeah.
I like
don't
where
think
it
they're
is now,
Yeah.
personally. I think we've gotten
Just
it
leave
to
it. Can always come back to it if we had to. So. The applications we're getting now, they're for like 30 acres or a 30-acre
Yeah,
lot.
they're
Doesn't
large.
mean the
Yeah.
panel size would be 30 acres.
But even some of
They're
the
tier
panel
3s.
sizes are tier 3s, yes.
Yeah.
Yeah. And we have tier 3s existing in the town currently,
Yeah.
based on these definitions.
So what I'm hearing is people are comfortable with this?
The concept?
I am.
Yeah, I think.
And do we want to consider moving tier 2 into that other category?
That was a
with tier
suggestion
1?
I just made. I hear Adeline's argument, and I can agree with her.
Comfortable with it
Mhm.
as is?
As is.
I'm not 100% comfortable with adding tier 2 in. I am 100% comfortable with 3 and 4 as
Okay.
is in here.
Yeah.
Let's put it that way. So,
The other note in this article was that the town assessed a fee per acre of usage for the arrays. And the idea was that the town would get the revenues from these usages to help them buy conservation land or parkland or other types of benefits like that to the town.
We're
Just
getting
wanna-
taxes.
Where did that come from? Is this from the Ag Committee?
No, this was an article that Terry had sent
I
around.
found it yesterday, I sent it on to
Yeah.
John, just to
Didn't say.
FYI.
And they were charged, this town was charging $10,000 an acre, and we're using the monies to invest in parklands and conservation lands and things
Yeah,
like that.
But so I don't
Just
know
throw it
if
out there
this is
for
the same
conversation.
article that was in the Association of Towns. There was a municipality that imposed an impact fee.
Yeah.
And it's my understanding it's tied up currently in litigation. I think we
That
need
makes
to,
sense.
because the park and rec fee specifically is allowed by state law. I don't know about some of these other impact fees. We'd have to check that. So,
Okay.
It's almost like incentive zoning, you know, that they were, okay, yeah, you can go ahead and clear this huge lot and put up a 40, 50 acre solar farm. But we need something in return to help preserve other property. So in a sense, it was kind of like incentive zoning, you know, an amenity for a benefit.
That's
So
a good point.
which
Trade-off.
you could do in tier 4 with this proposed law.
Yeah.
that's,
And then the incentive zoning law does allow the town board to accept a cash, payment as part of the community benefit, right? So you could theoretically, if you really wanted to make it work, there's a way to
add
make
that
it work.
into, or just say that that would fall under our incentives.
Well, it's existing. So this law, if you were gonna do a tier 4, it would have to be incentive zoning. And the incentive zoning law already separately that we passed provides for
Yeah.
that cash payment. So
And that is just adding a sentence to,
adding nothing, because it's already in
it's
here.
already in here. Okay, good.
The tier 4 is already incentive zoning being
Doug, you
separate.
have the incentive zoning in tier 1 and tier 2, which is fine. If you don't have it in tier 3,
Correct.
is that left out on purpose?
Yes, so specifically because of the size, right?
Right.
But that's something that I think you guys need to discuss, is basically to eliminate those larger entities from going into those same tier 3 places. And the tier 1 and 2 being smaller, because you have, arguably you would allow the tier 1 and 2, provided it meets all of the conditions, right? You would allow that the planning board could grant a special use permit, provided it's not a scenic viewshed overlay, or provided there's not a loss of valuable farmland, almost anywhere in the town.
So with the incentive zoning provision, theoretically, if somebody had a property not in any of these districts, they could come into the board under the incentive zoning and requested in a give and take that they be able to put a solar array on their property, provided they give something back to the town.
Right, so they'd have to make 2 applications. They'd have to make application for the solar with all of the
Like
provisions.
here.
Plus, additionally, they would have to make application to rezone the property to incentive zoning. It would be a dual application.
The town,
And
the
the-
fathers wouldn't approve that unless they
We
get.
know each other.
Right.
Mention.
Yeah, I will. There is a change we do need to make on page 6 to small scale solar energy definition, just to 4,000 square feet, so it mirrors the large scale max. We talked about this, Doug, page 6.
Right here.
Page,
It
the
says shall not exceed 1,000.
shall not
square
exceed
feet, so-
4,000 square feet.
Yeah.
For the small scale.
I thought the large scale.
Large
was-
scale is over 4.
4,000, okay,
Yeah,
I
so
see what you're
small
saying.
is up to 4.
So you're
Okay.
saying the definition is correct, is
No,
revised?
as revised to not exceed 4,000, and that mirrors the state's definition.
So it's okay.
No, we need to change it
Need
to
to change
4,
it from
from
1 to 4.
1,000.
Not
It
the,
is
not large
changed.
scale.
No,
under
small scale.
Go down
Large scale,
to, go down to,
Small scale. okay.
Yeah,
Oh,
yeah.
Okay, that should say 4,000.
Yes,
Yeah.
4,000.
oh,
And I was gonna ask about that too. So that is a state definition?
The
Yes,
4,000, yes.
yes.
there's
Yep.
something in the chat.
It's also, under D here on page 5, where it talks about 10% total lot coverage. Well, somebody, if you're in a R130 district, 10% is 3,000 square feet. So you wouldn't be able to, or would you not be able to?
You would, because you can go up to 4,
Yeah.
so that would be fine.
All right, I
Yeah,
just,
yeah, that would be, it would be okay. As
If-
written.
4,000 isn't a minimum,
That's the maximum for small.
max.
Yes, yes.
And then is E on page 5, correct, Shauna? That says shall not, small scale shall not
Yeah.
exceed 1,000
Oh,
square feet.
yes.
Well, wait,
Well, no.
that's pertaining to getting the special use
Yeah,
permit.
no,
So
that
if
needs to
it's-
stay the same.
That's the same?
Yeah, that
Yes.
needs to stay as
Okay.
is.
And then finally, the ECB had brought up whether we were talking about for the tier 2s, whether we were talking about an 8-acre being the total lot size or the installation size. Like, for example, could you have 2 adjoining lots with 4 acres each or something like that? So I don't know if we've addressed that or not.
Well, each parcel, each individual tax map number would be its own application.
Okay,
There would be no other way, because you can't,
So they wouldn't, yeah, you can't combine
you
them.
can't
they couldn't
combine.
combine the project over 2
No.
properties. Okay.
No, they would
Just
have to
confirming.
combine the
Could
properties.
they
and-
do a lot line adjustment? Just
Sure, if they had 2
change-
parcels, but
That would be the solution.
Then that would be one parcel.
Yeah.
Okay, got it.
So, John, if I may, I just wanted to mention, we do have a conceptual plan, as Doug said, in that's large scale, that would basically fly in the face of everything that's proposed.
it's a tier 3 based on
It's
these
a tier 3,
definitions.
absolutely. So, and we have another one coming that's also a tier 3. They're in sketch plan, so they're not a formal application, but I would anticipate that they'll be into us in January. So that would trigger that it's a real application for a special use permit. So, there's no way we can get this passed, obviously, before January, because we have to set the public hearing in December for January. So it's something to consider, December, putting a moratorium on solar in order for us to finish these changes. That's what I wanted to suggest, or
How
at
long
least
does the public
discuss.
hearing have to be advertised? I think I asked you that question the other
Yeah,
day.
it's a matter of days. So given the current town board meeting schedule, at the December meeting, we could set a public hearing on this law and hold the public hearing at the town board's organizational meeting on January 9th and adopt this law, if everybody's comfortable with it, on January 9th. The challenge with that is typically with the local laws and everything, we would refer them out to all the other entities one last final time, get final comments and everything. We're just not gonna have enough time to do that, where the moratorium could actually be enacted. The other thing to think about is if we introduce this, you could have an onslaught of applications before this gets adopted. So if you do the moratorium and set the public hearing at the same time.
Can we do a short
At the meeting.
moratorium then, or?
Or December meeting,
You can set it at December
you
meeting.
can just declare that moratorium. There's no public hearing required for that. It's just,
Yeah, you can enact a moratorium. I want to talk with Nadler a little bit more before the meeting, obviously, to make sure everything, all the ducks in a row. But you could enact a moratorium. You could put a sunset of 6 months or the adoption of an updated solar law, whichever comes first, and, just kind of.
John, do we want to open anything up to public
Yeah,
comment?
I will in a moment, yeah. Are any other comments on this
Yeah,
language?
I've got one that we have talked about and never resolved. I maintain that storage is part and parcel of solar, and in a couple of places, we've essentially excluded battery storage systems, and I think that's the wrong thing to do. Because as we know, the sun doesn't shine all the time, and you need to store it if it can't be.
Can you refer us specifically to?
Yeah,
where that is?
page 1, item A4, we say energy battery storage systems, so and so, shall not be permitted in any zoning district. Page 2, item.
Let's pause it,
Okay.
the first page, Tom, just for a second. Let's talk about that.
I highly disagree with you, Tom. I feel that the battery storage systems are an even bigger impact on our community than the solar arrays. I don't see any purpose for having them in the town of Canandaigua.
Because you don't like the looks of them.
I mean, yes, I don't like the looks of them. I don't think that they need to be
Everybody's entitled to their
here.
opinion.
I don't think
I
that-
believe the storage should be part of it and will be part of it. And the more restrictive we as a town become, we're encouraging the state to impose even more distasteful rules on us.
How are we encouraging the state to come after us if we discourage them here?
The tier 4 ones essentially is that they've taken it out of our hands.
I think we already addressed that, the tier 4 ones, so.
Right, but I believe people can disagree that battery storage is or will be part of the equation when you have solar.
But we've kind of all already agreed that we would like to discourage large-scale solar in the
Some-
town,
some
At this
people-
point,
so, at this point.
because we said we look at revisit battery storage, if they can.
I just think
I
that
think
we shouldn't
talked-
be excluding
We
it
talked about
because
the
it's,
technology
it's part of
changing
it.
and we sort of like to hold that off, and that's why I think this was included in this draft to exclude battery storage.
Okay, so let's hold on any further conversation about the battery storage till we open it up to the public.
I think that's what we.
Okay, well,
we agreed.
one other thing to point out then, while we're discussing it, is under our definition on page 6 of solar energy equipment, we specifically articulate storage devices. So if we're not going to consider batteries part of solar energy, we ought to not include it in our definition.
Well, they do have small batteries. I mean, there will be a small facility with the solar. It's just not the large scale battery so they will have some sort of
My point is
storage.
we- Okay, we're
So
gonna
we
have
should
to
probably-
clarify our definitions, or clarify our exclusions, and I firmly believe we should leave storage in there, and
Those batteries must be more for managing the facility or
Yeah,
something like
absolutely.
that.
Yeah.
And then,
Okay, I think this is a good point to, or a good time to open it up to the community, so, I apologize, I have my back to some people, but it's a little tough for me to turn around and maneuver, but, anybody have anything they wanna say? Anyone on television that, has anything they wanna say? Okay, good,
before we leave
yes,
this,
Tom.
I didn't have benefit of reading the apparently multi-page minutes from
The Ag Committee.
a committee. Previously, we've talked about the definition of valuable agricultural land. And as a farmer, you or I might consider my land more valuable if it tosses up X number of dollars an acre as a solar farm being valuable. Have they addressed that? The
Let
Ag
me-
committee.
So Chris Nadler and I have had extensive conversations. I've also talked to members of the Agriculture Committee, and I know we've had some conversations here. We strongly advise you not to define valuable agriculture land. The reason is the planning board is a decision-making body that has the ability and wherewithal to make informed decisions. And there's really no need to define it because the planning board is going to take into account everybody's input. The Ag Committee, the ECB, the law, their own knowledge, their own resources to make an informed decision whether or not it's valuable agricultural land.
So do we use that term?
Yes,
We use the term,
but we don't
Leave.
define it, to leave it to the planning board.
leave it to the planning board and property owner perhaps to determine. Okay,
Gives them more flexibility, so.
okay.
Yeah, the
But
property owner would
that's
go
something we
and
discussed before, right?
make an argument to the
Yeah.
planning board as to.
Okay.
Yeah. So the only loose end I'm hearing is the conversation about battery storage. Tom, are you comfortable moving forward as is, or do you wanna
I think
converse
we've
about
had
that more?
a
Or?
lot of conversation about it already over the last 3 meetings.
I'm just afraid that folks make their decision based on optics and what they think the battery looks like, rather than the science and the utility.
Personally, I think the racks of panels are uglier than the storage,
Well,
battery
that's
storage
it. You
containers.
pick your poison, they're all ugly.
However, I will say this, that what we're doing here is trying to discourage large facilities. So by being restrictive with battery storage is in that vein, heading in that direction, in my opinion. So that's why I would say no.
I think it's
leave it as
Ultimately,
it
we've
is.
got no say on the large ones.
Well,
which-
exactly.
So we're screwed.
Tier 4,
Yeah.
if the state comes in and says, yeah, you got some good stuff there about tier 4, but here's what's gonna happen. And they say the batteries are going in, you could take them to court and try to argue, but in the end, one side will prevail.
And that's where they would have the most impact.
Well, yeah,
Yeah, so
Well,
let it go.
everything, all being said, I think we're ready to vote on this. And I would add the caveat that we vote on this, whether to recommend. And
we got an objection.
somebody wanted to speak.
Speak.
I think you said speak and you thought, yeah.
With the caveat that we recommend to the board that we approve or disapprove of this, and then we recommend a moratorium for 6 months. And or the passing of this, whichever is quicker, right?
Agreed.
Okay, do I have a motion to proceed with this
So
ordinance? Yes,
Clarification, please.
please.
Our current regulations are in effect right now, but if we add a moratorium, there are no regulations. Nobody's doing anything.
That is correct. It would cease all applications. So the one thing I would just ask for clarification is your motion relative to the moratorium for ground mounted solar energy systems.
Personal, I mean, the tier 1.
Yes,
Anything beyond tier 1.
Anything ground mounted.
Yes,
It would be
ground
easy.
mounted.
Ground
anything
mounted.
ground mounted.
Anything ground mounted, because we obviously we have the unified solar permit system from the state for all of the rooftop systems, so we're not saying to stop those. This would
However, a
be-
point of clarification on that, Doug.
Mhm.
An individual residence,
Mhm.
if I remember reading this correctly, could have a ground mounted system for their own personal use.
They could with this, but the
Yes.
moratorium would prohibit a ground mounted system.
Why don't we just make the moratorium tier 2, 3, and 4?
Well, if we
Because
put,
this isn't
we
defined.
adapt the
Oh,
moratorium.
you're right.
Yeah, we don't have that.
There aren't
We
any.
adapt we adapt the
Ground
moratorium
mounted, then we gotta do.
with the stipulation that the moratorium is lifted once this is approved. This could be approved in January, so we're
Could-
really not
Yeah,
Correct.
it's not that
slowing
long.
anybody down.
Correct,
so.
right.
You're right, we have to do ground mounted because we don't have.
So then how do we,
Say that again. to
yeah,
Clarify.
how do we address that?
We impose a moratorium, and
Section
whose endpoint
220,
is
62.
the adoption of this document, this
Right.
ordinance. Once that's adopted, moratorium's lifted on 1 through 4.
When you say we, this
Town
group
board.
here.
This
The
group.
town- The town
This-
We
board.
recommend it to the
We're
town
only
board.
recommend it
The
to
town board. okay.
I'm thinking ahead because I'm on the board. I'm just damn weak.
Okay,
Yeah,
we don't have any
No.
legislative.
But the moratorium would be for all ground mounted systems. And like you said, once this is adopted, it's not really gonna be lifted.
So as a point of clarification, we need a motion to recommend this to the town board along with a moratorium on any ground mounted solar systems until for 6 months or the passage of this, whichever is sooner.
Earlier, yeah. I will make that motion.
Second.
All in favor?
Wait,
Aye.
wait.
Any
Discussion.
further?
Conversation. Chuck?
Yes.
From the planning board point of view, is this appropriate for things that are pending, even at the sketch
I
level?
think the only thing pending formally are these concept plans, and
And their
we can look at
concepts.
concept plans.
You're
but
okay?
It's nothing
Yeah,
formal.
okay.
Okay.
Ready?
Thank you. Well,
Okay, we had a motion, we had a second. All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? So moved.
That's 3 months.
Longer than that.
That was a long
At
one,
least
huh?
3 months.
How long?
Hey, everybody, would I be able to say something real quick? I have literally three minutes, and I know short-term rentals are the next thing on your agenda. Would I be able to just kind of say my piece, what I came here for, and then I can go on my way?
Yeah, I can't read the screen, so tell us who you are and where you live.
My name's Josh Briner. I live in Canandaigua, New York. I too believe Canandaigua was the chosen spot. I moved here purposefully. I went to college at FLCC. Love the community. I could tell you all the great things that like short-term rentals do for the community, but that's not your concern. You're concerned about like the negative things. And there certainly are negative aspects of short-term rentals. Nobody here is going to deny that. The main thing I want to leave you with is that I have a big social network in Canandaigua of short-term rental investors. And I hope that you know we are not adversaries, we're partners. We agree with regulation. We agree that nobody should have a house next door that has parties every weekend. We agree with a lot of the stuff that you guys want. So that's the main thing I came here to say. I just hope you view us as partners. I got to go on substitute teaching right now, but I hope you all have a good day. And thank you for letting me say that.
Thank you for your feedback.
What's the organization?
Short-term rental investors, a group, I didn't hear, and that's all I heard.
Can I ask Lisa Fitzgerald? I think she might know.
Yes, I do know him, and he does have a group that's upstate, I have to look.
Upstate New York Airbnb investors. It's mostly it's a Rochester-based organization and this greater area, but then there's also members other parts of New York State as well who are part of it.
And he does have a management company as well that he offers for anyone who
Griner.
trying to run it from a distance. He offers boots on the ground as well.
Thank you. Sorry.
Oh, so I guess the major point of conversation relative to rentals is whether we want to have hosted or unhosted short-term rentals. That's, I think, the essence of the conversation.
I think there's more to it than that.
Please.
I think there's local hosting and there's in the same house hosting.
That's another good
Which I
point,
think is
which I
something we
think
need
is
to
part of our
discuss as well.
conversation, because I agree that there's some conversation to be had about that.
I mean, it's one thing when someone lives in Florida and has a short-term rental up here with a management company versus someone lives in Penn Yan and has a short-term rental in Canandaigua and is stopping by once a week to check on it. I think those are two very different situations. I don't know how that gets defined.
So one of the things, Doug, and I don't know if you've had an opportunity to do it, that I asked you to do was to provide a summary of complaints that we may have had and what those complaints were, so we could identify how big of an issue this is and whether there are, what the essence of the issues are.
Yep. So there was an email, actually, it was dated November 16th, but so now there's a couple things. I gave the town board members in my weekly administrative packet a memo back on September 29th that talked about kind of currently what we're facing, and there was a whole list of questions and everything attached to that. And we can resend that out if need be. Yes. But currently, Property Guard, which is our software solution that helps us manage short-term rentals, list 160 dwellings currently offered in the town of Canandaigua through various websites. You can make an argument whether or not that's closer to 200, but as of today, there's 160 dwellings offered through various websites. 10 plus or minus are legal bed and breakfast with special use permits, and we define those as tourist homes in the town of Canandaigua. If it's if the individual lives in the home or resides in the home and then rents out essentially multiple bedrooms and gets a special use permit through the town planning board as a bed and breakfast, we call those a tourist home. In October, we sent out about 150 letters that were sent out by Property Guard to various short-term rental properties that are listed through the various websites. And then we had removed the legal permitted bed and breakfast listings. As of Currently, as of the day of this email, and I think this is still active, property guard lists that we have 34 active permits. So we have 130 plus or minus units operating illegally in the town of Canandaigua.
Illegally meaning not registered.
They have not gotten the registration and the proper permit, right?
Thank you.
All permits will expire December 31st, 2022. The town of Canandaigua, we adopted an annual registration requirement. And so everybody will have to reapply for the 2023 use of short-term rentals. The complaints. We always refer the complainant to the owner of record unless it's an illicit discharge, for instance, like a failed septic system or some sort of stormwater issue. Renters will call the office regularly and complain about items interior to the home. Everything from obscene photos on the wall to dirty sinks, toilets clogged, et cetera. We don't do anything on the interior home. We refer those back to the owner of record. We've received a couple of complaints about routine parties and loud noises, vehicles parked along County Road 16, trespassing. We have received actually 0 official complaints. This is from Chris Jensen, our code enforcement officer, that we're willing to go on the record. So they have officially contacted 0 permit holders due to those complaints. So those would be an official filing with a complaint form that is filled out and filed with code enforcement that they would then follow up with the property owner.
You've had none of those?
0 as of the date of November 16th, 2022.
And you said the complaints that were verbal over the phone were illegal parking?
Illegal,
trespassing?
yes, vehicles parked along County Road 16, trespassing, and then complaints about routine parties and loud noises.
And garbage.
Are most of the 160 plus along the lake?
No, we actually
They're
finding
scattered
more and more
around.
surprising that are like uplands of the lake, more that are in like rural settings and those types of things. I mean, there's certainly some along the lake also, obviously, but they're around.
Property guard just coordinates the sending out the letter, informing people they have to be, they should register their property. That's the beginning and end of their involvement, really. It's
Well,
not-
the system actually allows us to go out and find if there's an entity that's listed as a short-term rental. So that's what they're doing. They're identifying those that are likely short-term rentals, right? And then that system also sends out the letters. That system also has an online app so that the person who owns the property can make the application for the short-term rental and receive that through electronically. And there's a permit number issued with that.
Let me dig a little deeper, Doug. Have we had a lot of calls about illegal parking? Have we had a lot of calls about trespassing and about parties and noise, or does it seem to be specific to particular dwellings?
I think the most complaints that I hear are specific to specific dwellings. You've got a property that is not very neighborly, is how I would describe it. May not necessarily be breaking any specific town of Canandaigua law, but it's not very neighborly. And then you've got quite a few complaints that usually come over an extended period of time pertaining to that one particular property. You know, when this first started, I know we've used this example when we talked about short-term rentals before. We had an issue with the configuration of basements, 2 bedrooms, and so it created a safety aspect because there were not the proper points of egress. We had failing septic systems. We have all those types of things, right? So with the law that we currently have, it's basic in that it requires registration, but with that registration at least comes proof that it's safe. But that's essentially all it does. You know, that there are the points of egress and stuff. It doesn't take into account anything relative to the trash, to the noise, to the trespassing and all of the other things.
But we do have ordinances in place for trash.
Well, the
or not.
state has a property maintenance law, so there is nothing specific to the town of Canandaigua. The town of Canandaigua does not have a noise ordinance. The town doesn't have other laws really pertaining to some of these issues.
And it's not spelled out in our zoning either, correct?
No law.
Correct.
So I'll just throw it out there because this begs the question of, to me, not whether it's hosted or not hosted, because you could have hosted people that were not neighborly versus unhosted that are not neighborly. It seems to me the essence of the issue is whether we have ordinances in place to address the unneighborliness of the people that are creating this issue. And is it possible to address this through ordinances? And I just throw it out for conversation, so
Can you
what I'm saying,
legislate good behavior?
Or bad
good
behavior.
Neighborliness or whatever. No matter what rules you got.
right, that's the question, right? I mean, to me, it's, because I think, there can be points made for hosted short-term rentals and probably pros and cons made for non-hosted short-term rentals, but it seems the issue to me is all the other consequences, so illegal parking or trash that's not picked up or disrupting your neighbor's peace and quiet, or
It can change a neighborhood as well. I mean,
absolutely.
I think the question also becomes, I think, not requiring, and I'm just being a devil's advocate here, but not requiring any form of hosting encourages more buy-ups of short-term rentals in the town. Is that a positive for the town? I think that's something we need to be discussing, so. I think that's why Victor in particular has legislated against unhosted rentals, so is to discourage short-term rentals in the community, so. I think that's why it was originally brought up, because it's obviously, you're not gonna have people on a nationwide scale investing into short-term rental properties if they're required to be hosted, so.
Hasn't somebody passed that comment along to us in the business that's why we've seen such an increase, that because we don't have a lot of regulation, so, and it's all unhosted. So,
The
yeah.
regulations we have, 34 are complying, 160 are not. Maybe that's our problem. That's part of it. I mean, I think the
Enforcement.
original registration was the intent of having
Yeah.
someone to contact when
Yeah.
there is a nuisance. And without that, you're knocking on doors and you're trying to find somebody in the middle of the night. So I think we should get to enforcing our current registration first. I don't know how we do that, other than we use agencies that are involved in the short-term rental business of helping us contact and put more pressure on those property owners.
Well, currently, there's no penalty if somebody doesn't register.
It would be a violation of code, and then it would issue, if they don't get into compliance, we would issue a court appearance ticket and take the matter to court. So it would be a violation of chapter 220.
So those
the
other
town code.
100 and some odd, have we done that?
No, we haven't. And that's part of this whole conversation, right? The other thing that has happened is, and I put this in the note, I just happen to have it here in front of me. In February of 2020, there were 69 short-term rentals in the town of Canandaigua based on our data at the time there were 73 in July of 2020, and now there's upwards of 200. That's 150% increase. It's just, even enforcing of our own code, we're getting ready to add a zoning officer, which will help and those types of things, but it's very time intensive to issue these court appearance tickets and then go to court. But we can do it. We just need time.
Well, another thing, if you guys have this original packet, that on page 31, there was a section in there about how, I believe, from the way I'm reading this, it sounds like Victor is issuing special use permits for all of their short-term rentals, is that correct? So their enforcement method is, it says, a special use permit issued under this section shall be valid for 1 year from the date of issuance, subject to subsequent renewal periods of 1 year to 3 years at the discretion of the planning board, based on the history of complaints and violations under the section relating to the property during the preceding permit period.
I believe
So-
that's only for hosted though.
Yeah, but they only allow hosted.
Right, unhosted or prohibited. Right,
Yeah, so, but that, I mean, that's
a change to the zoning.
that,
And
yeah,
how a lot of places are
that's how
regulated.
they're specifically, I mean, there's none of this permitting or anything, it's just straight up, you have a special use permit. And it doesn't, if there's complaints against your property, it doesn't get renewed, so.
I
So
have,
they put some
I have
teeth in
someone
it, so.
asking
Yeah.
for clarification.
We'll get to the public in a.
Oh,
in a
okay,
bit.
they were just asking
Yep.
what is hosted versus not
Yep.
hosted.
So the legislative intent, when the town of Victor adopted their law, the purpose of this section is to control and regulate the use of short-term rentals within the town. The town board, this is the town of Victor, finds that unhosted short-term rentals threaten the residential character and quality of life of neighborhoods where such uses exist because they tend to attract excessive noise, disorderly conduct, the accumulation of refuse, and other nuisances. And then it goes into more detail and then defines hosted versus unhosted, but that's the whole
Which we
premise
can
of
define however we wish to, obviously. It just, I mean, I think honestly, I don't want to throw the baby out with the bathwater. If we have positive short-term rentals in our area that are providing a positive use to the state tourism market, to our local residents, I don't think that's necessarily all going to be a negative for us, but I mean, this, having something in it that we can somehow indicate, okay, if you're getting complaint after complaint after complaint, we're going to revoke your ability to do what you're doing, as opposed to just, you know, allowing it willy-nilly, so to speak.
But that also forces compliance up front,
It does.
because right
yeah.
now we're saying you gotta give us this information.
Yeah.
And that's it. For
we
100, some
can-
of these
we
people,
can
I say,
see
okay,
How
be right
many
with
of
you.
like to
If-
give us that information.
Yeah,
So
so I
without
mean,
AG,
something like that would be,
Yeah,
So one of the things, and this is why we actually had the company there, you know, it was really going back and forth a lot. Sean and I were talking with Chris, and then this company, Property Guard, that we're using, and the company is really trying to improve efforts and the things that they can do. But that's why we had the company go ahead and send out the letters in October. It was the end of October, essentially, right before Halloween, that said, hey, in the town of Canandaigua, this is your notice. You have to get this registration. Because now, for those 130 that haven't complied, we can say, you received a letter, here's your court appearance ticket, we'll see you in court. Now they're in violation because they've been notified, but I have to notify them first.
yeah, that would be good, but we haven't had the staff to do all of that.
It's gonna be time intensive.
But, yeah, I mean, so we add another staff member and we dump this on them. So what we were expecting that person to do now is gonna be diluted because
So let me
I
be
think you need
facetious.
something a little stronger.
I'll be facetious for a moment. If we had less meeting minutes,
I
Poor
use that
Kimberly.
person.
think we
Just
already
because
know.
Kimberly's competent doesn't mean we have to give her everything to.
Throw in another facetious thing. Do we have a guest tax that would pay for the additional policing?
We do not have an occupancy tax in the town of Canandaigua.
But there is a registration fee, isn't there?
There's a $99 registration fee.
So that's
Would
offsetting
that
the,
help cover the
No,
No, and it's prorated too, so
Yeah.
it's.
how about a guest tax too?
but
Something
the
we
town
could talk
could
about as well.
implement an occupancy tax, yes.
I mean, whenever any of us go somewhere else,
Yep.
you pay a guest tax.
Would help with the enforcement issue potentially, right?
That's what I'm thinking.
Yeah, I mean, it sounds like enforcement is
Needed.
needed. It might be the bigger issue here that we're.
well, requiring a special use permit would be a real hammer. I mean, that would give you a little bit more to do, you know.
I don't have a problem with the planning board issuing the permit, it's then enforcing it, because it
Yeah.
takes staff
Yeah.
to then make sure they're in compliance with the special use permit.
Yeah.
So are they in compliance with registration, or are they in compliance, I still need people
Exactly.
to do it.
It's,
Oh, yeah.
to Tom's point, would it be worthwhile for us to go and do some research to determine what other communities such as ours are charging for a occupancy tax?
I'd rather address the question of hosted, unhosted first before we get into the occupancy tax. I
Okay.
think that's the first one we've got, and I'd love to hear, we've got a lot of people in the room and online that
Yeah.
know more about this topic than I do. I'd love to hear from. So.
Okay.
So Victor has strictly hosted. They have very many short-term rentals. Is that in that?
I don't know, it's not in there, I mean. we can find
I mean,
out.
because that's a discouraging,
Yeah.
Okay, anything else we want to say before we open it up to the public?
Excuse my ignorance, the discussion of hosted versus unhosted, what are the pros and cons, what are we? I mean, hosted is the owner lives there, or someone lives there, right?
Yes,
Unhosted is, it's freelance, you get a key and you got the place for the week.
yes.
What are the pros and cons? I mean,
We can talk about them here in our committee, and then we can open it up if you want, if we want to do it that way.
and having a resident on site living with the tenant or the occupant,
Mhm.
is that good or bad?
I
That's
think,
good- that's a
I
good
think having
question.
hosted, I think the one clear thing that does, if they're hosted, it's discouraging outside investors. So I think that's the biggest change that it would do. It would discourage outside investors and
Couldn't
encourage
the outside
local
investor have a
investors.
designee that lives there?
All
However-
of that could be defined.
However, the
you wanna do,
counterpoint
so.
to that, Adeline, is many. I
Mhm.
mean, one, we have no inventory of housing available right now.
Yep.
And in part, that's because of the demand for our housing.
Exactly.
And the demand for our housing is probably tied directly to this issue.
Mhm.
I mean, I could go on and on all day long. I mean, the other thing is that if an investor wants to rent his property out, generally speaking, that investor is gonna go and take great pride
Mhm.
so that they can go and rent their property.
Mhm.
But it, you know, to me, it sounds like we have some rogue people, landowners, that are being disrespectful as neighbors.
Agreed. Yeah.
But I
I'm
mean,
just trying to define for Chuck.
yeah,
he's
the
looking
property
for what that-
values, I
the
think the
positive
fact
and
that we have such
negative.
a high demand for residences here
Mhm.
keeps our property values high. Our property values are much higher than our surrounding communities. I know that personally, but
And I see the disadvantage of unhosted, because then they have carte blanche to.
that's right. They can do whatever they want to and run havoc and just, yeah.
In the
Well, maybe
Victor,
in the interest of, we've
Yeah.
talked about this enough.
Yeah,
We
let
have
the
some
community-
experts here.
Yep.
that
Yep.
can-
if I
Give
could,
us
Chuck,
some-
the Victor version, just so you
Yep.
know, the hosted requires the titled owner to be at the parcel
Yep.
for the hosted. That's
So
the
it's
Victor.
Ajax LLC is the title of it.
It says the permanent resident of the dwelling and or person or entity that holds legal and or equitable title. And then it says has to be on-site presence of the owner at the property during the duration of the rental
So
period.
the owner is Ajax LLC.
So then
So
a
they say.
representative of
yeah,
Ajax
I have a
LLC would
designee,
have to
so
be,
You have to have somebody on site.
but it would have to be technically a
there.
person who owns Ajax LLC because it's the title.
Sure, there are tenants that
Of
are
course,
renting
of
out
course there are,
a room in a
Yeah,
house.
that's what I heard.
Yeah.
All right.
Okay.
I suggest we open
Yeah,
it up.
yeah,
to
we'll open it
They know
up.
what our issues are. I think maybe they can help us.
And we'll start here with the room and then we'll move to the
Mhm.
online after that. So open it up. Anybody want to go first?
Sure.
Go ahead.
Okay, my name is Vanessa Waters. As a 40-year resident owner of a horse farm, I am now experiencing what an absentee owner of a 6,000 plus square foot home on less than 5 acres can do to ruin the rural feel of our residential neighborhood under the current town controls. This is an event venue, 4210 Middle Cheshire Road, listed on no less than 12 platforms. This is clearly a commercial enterprise in a residential neighborhood. We were informed, call the sheriff about issues. An on-site hosted short-term rental requirement would prevent this. Let me predict the future. Okay, I've studied this stuff for about 10 years. A 200-year-old farm housed for 42 years with this Canandaigua residents will become the next event venue, disguised as a single-family residence. 22 acres, I got 1,000 foot on Middle Cheshire, I got another 1,000 foot on Johnson Road. Frontage, overlooking the Bristol Hills and Canandaigua Lake. I've already been approached. It's my neighborhood. I don't want this to happen in my neighborhood. Ed and I have traveled all over the world using Airbnbs, and I can tell you, the ones that are hosted are people that are vested into the community. They encourage people to go to the restaurants, the local businesses. They encourage people to appreciate our area the way we as Canandaigua residents do. I'm not an investor, but with this, all of a sudden I'm realizing my farm that's assessed at about 300 grand, I've been offered over $500,000 for my place. No problem. And I said, well, I've already turned down 2.2 million, so maybe you better pony up a bigger LLC. Where am I going with this? I bought years ago to live in this neighborhood. All my neighbors know me. You know, it's, when people talk about where the most complaints have come from, look behind my house. He's a surgeon that lives in Manhattan. He was there for Christmas. And also he had contractors there. Were there building permits issued? Does anybody know what's going on? He's got 200 foot of road frontage, and I personally have seen 50 cars parked up that hill. He has caterers, he has music, he has tents. All of these things would require permits, and I've never been, it just goes on. I actually have him apologizing on voicemail for his behavior. He had 4 weddings there this year. The place without the without the weddings produced $30,000 a year. He's not a resident. He doesn't care about the town of Canandaigua. He doesn't even vote here. But you know what it does is it's continuing for the taxpayer to build the value of our properties. Me being a longtime resident on Social Security, where am I going? Somebody comes in and says, hey, you got 22 acres on 2 different roads. You know, this is the next big venue in Canandaigua if this continues. And I won't be living there. So that's my passionate thing, hosted, Victor. I've got it right here, hosted Victor. That's my comment.
Thanks, Vanessa.
Thank you.
Others?
I'd be happy to go. My name's Brett McManus. I'm a resident right here in Canandaigua, where I have a hosted Airbnb right here on West Ave, and then I also have an unhosted Airbnb in the town of South Bristol. And I guess the piece that I'd say about those is we treat them equally the same. In both cases, we recommend the local area. Our unhosted one's a cabin where we spend a lot of time on the weekends, but for the week when we're up here working and can't be there, having an Airbnb is how we can afford to keep that place. But still, it's recommending the local grocery stores in Naples and, you know, Brews and Brats in South Bristol and stuff like that, which is the same thing that we do in our hosted one. The one piece I'd say, like the terms of hosted versus unhosted, I know South Bristol, you know, they have a lot of infrastructure behind their short-term rental program. As part of getting that, we had to have a septic inspection done, which made sure the septic tank was good and also regulated the number of guests we're allowed to have. And based on that, we're also regulated on parking spaces too, on a revocable permit that can get taken away. And I know every resident around us has to have my cell phone number. And if we get a call within 20 minutes, we're down there taking care of an issue. So what I will say is, you know, of course, I heard it brought up before of that takes a lot of manpower to run something like that, specifically on the revoking it side of it. And that costs money. And I know I won't speak for everybody in the room, but the occupancy tax is something that's been thrown out. And I know many people who are positive short-term rental hosts in the area would have no issue paying an occupancy tax if it meant being able to put infrastructure in for short-term rentals that can keep it around for a while.
Thank you. Yeah, I'll go next. My name's Dave LaFive. I also too live here locally. I'm a real estate investor in many facades. I have apartment buildings. I have Airbnb. I'm currently renovating the Patty's Place building. I'm turning that into 5 short-term rental units. I care deeply about this community. I've started my real estate investing with buying foreclosure homes and fixing them up and turning them into very good homes between here and Geneva. And I am highly for regulation. I see the difference between Geneva and Canandaigua. I work with Dave Hubble, obviously the city code enforcer there. I think he does a phenomenal job at making sure people are doing what they're supposed to be doing, holding landlords accountable. Then in Geneva, they don't have one, and you go to Geneva and the place is a dump. And I'm pulling my money out of Geneva because it's being ran so poorly. And as he was saying earlier, the short-term rental stuff went from 60, 80 units up to 160. That's a lot in 1 year. And but there's a lot of benefit for the community, but because it is such a big thing, if there isn't regulation in place, it's going to be bad. So the sooner it can get done, the better. And I think the tax part is kind of tricky, because are you gonna tax their income and stuff like that? There's things that are done on Venmo that is more difficult to track. I just threw a quick number out there. What about every special permit that got filed was automatically a $500 application fee? 160 people doing that, that's $80,000 an hour. Or I mean, $80,000 a year. That's a position right there to focus solely on making sure these properties are ran correctly. What this poor lady over here is dealing with is a slumlord. That's it. The slumlord comes in, they care about the money, and they're out, and that's it. I'd buy the place right now if I could, to make sure it's ran properly. It's people like that ruin what I built. They ruin it. They give us bad names, and it's equally frustrating for me. So I think there is, and comparing Canandaigua and Victor isn't. I mean, Canandaigua's always been a seasonal place. What's our population go up to in June, July, August? I mean, you can't even take Main Street anymore. So Canandaigua has a great opportunity, and I think if we can figure out how everybody can be happy, then we can be on top of things really well. And I think going into so the other thing is, when you talked about, like, so we get the special permit usage, what about first time, like noise, trash, cars, a warning, second time a fine, third time the property can now no longer lose their special permit.
Special use permit.
All right, so you get 3 warning, 3 strikes, you're out. And then if that property has 3 strikes under the same owner or whatever, they can't, they're operating illegally. That's just an idea that I have. And I also look at it too is, as an investor, when things are more regulated or a little bit more difficult, as you could say, it forces out the bad people. It's only the people that know how to do things the right way want to be involved. And again, I could just bring it back to me. I'm pulling out of Geneva and investing my money back here in Canandaigua. So that's my piece on it. And I'm sorry you're dealing with that.
Thank you. Anyone else?
Yeah, so I'm with Finger Lakes Premier Properties. We manage about 300 vacation homes around the Finger Lakes region, not just in Canandaigua. We are involved with multiple town boards, and so we're familiar with the application process. South Bristol's a great example as well. On the lines of hosted versus not hosted, I would honestly say the unhosted version is just not feasible in terms of vacation rental trends. People do not want to stay for majority of the part of with somebody living in the house. That's what makes vacation rentals what they are, is they want a private dwelling. With the pandemic, we saw that increase substantially. The demand for vacation rentals actually surpassed hotels because people wanted that private dwelling for their families. So if you're gonna go with hosted, your number of vacation rentals is absolutely going to plummet, but I will say that there will be a fight back, just from what we're hearing from owners and other town boards. Where occupancy is being limited, it's turning into not such a friendly discussion, and we want to keep that here in Canandaigua. I'm also a resident here in Canandaigua as well. Tax versus application fee, to both of your points, the application fee, we've seen them vary quite a bit. I would say Canandaigua's is probably one of the lower sides that we've seen. It's a lot easier to impose a higher application fee than it is to go through the process for the application taxes. In terms of what you're dealing with the absentee owner, it's not just a local problem. We're involved with national organizations, and the absentee owners is the #1 cause for issues that you're having. South Bristol is a great example. They do have it in their application that you cannot host events. If you're gonna host an event, you have to get an additional application for that. Good neighbor policies. So with Premier Properties, we're also starting a local organization, Finger Lakes Vacation Rental Association. And what we're doing is we're really promoting responsible renting practices and also reasonable regulations. We're also for reasonable regulations. We understand it. I won't repeat everything that the others said here. But we are happy to share with anybody what our guest license agreement is. It's all about communication. It's about communicating to the people who are coming here what the expectations are. You are staying in a neighborhood. You have neighbors. There are noise hours for staying in a vacation rental. We advertise in every single one of our properties what the trash day is to make sure that the trash is taken care of, what the parking is. We have some homes where we specifically put up signs for parking. Our occupancy for our homes is based on a number of things. One of them is how many cars are actually allowed in the driveway. We send out information to the neighbors on both sides of every single one of our rentals, letting them know that we are managing a vacation home. Here is our contact number. If you have any issues, please contact us directly. It lessens the burden on the townships so that they're not getting the complaints, but we do take them very seriously. We call ahead. We do a lot of guest screening. There's a lot of neighborly practices that can be educated to a lot of these homeowners. Unfortunately, some, they're gonna keep doing what they do unless, it's enforced in some way. But we're happy to continue the dialogue. We're happy to, assist with, what might be the best fit in terms of what your regulations and application process looks like going forward. We want to help promote the region, not just our specific vacation rentals.
Do you mind if I ask you a question?
Yeah.
How many of your owners live truly out of the area? I mean, you said you would not support hosted only rentals.
Yeah.
How many are, upstate New York residents that are owners?
I don't know the exact number. I know we have more homeowners that live within New York State than outside of New York State.
Mhm.
Actually, a majority of our homeowners live in Rochester or Binghamton, Buffalo.
They've had some exposure to the
Yes.
area.
Oh yeah, absolutely. And there's a good number of our homeowners where they've inherited the home, and so they're renting it out and they're doing it through us because they want to pay for the tax. They want to cover the taxes for the homes.
Yeah.
They want to keep. We have a minimum of 4 weeks that they have to provide during peak season, and that's just to cover our costs. But
So
other
it's
than that, they're
Grandma's
using
house
it.
with $30,000 in
Yes.
taxes that
The
they want to be able
cousins
to
are
stay in.
staying there majority of the time.
Mhm.
We do have homeowners that only do that 4-week minimum with us. So, there's a lot of variations. It's not just investment buyers. We have seen an increase of investment buyers, of course, but a majority of the people who, rent through us, they use the home part of the year as well, so.
Do you require that a client, a potential client, show you a registration or a permit from a particular community prior to taking them on as a client?
Yeah, we actually help all of our owners, with the
So
paperwork.
you
Yep.
ensure, we won't list unless you're registered.
Correct.
Mhm.
We're actually hiring someone to do that function, because the regulations and the registration process can be time consuming as far as mapping the property and paying attention to the details. So it is becoming a job for us. But as Lindsay said, I'm Brian Zergus. I work with Lindsay. I live in Canandaigua. I own a vacation rental next to my home, so I would comply, but I have my neighbor who rents and the neighbor next to them who rent. One's an Airbnb and one we manage. But I will just add that if you go down this I almost fell off my chair when Lindsay sent me an email on Friday saying you guys were talking about hosting vacation rentals. And I've been doing this 30 years. I had to get online and look up the definition of that. If you continue the discussion on hosting vacation rentals, you will decimate the vacation rental industry. There's people come here to experience the area. This is not just for rich people. People have been renting, if you go back through some of the history books, people have been renting in Canandaigua generations. It's part of our way. And people are now renting to pay the taxes. So it's an integral part of our community and what we're all about. So I think your discussion is great, great comments from everybody here. And I'm sorry you're having that experience, that's not necessary.
Make an offer on that.
Please, somebody take that up next time. You
By the
guys all
way,
sound great.
I wanna ask you a question.
Yeah.
What, give me a generalization of what you're seeing for tourism tax.
Oh, geez.
Just give me a range.
I don't know off the top of my, Brian, do you know that?
It's mostly under 4% or under. Yates is
Yates has
4.
one.
3% is what I've seen in other places.
Okay, just so we haven't,
Yeah.
The county
Oh,
has
yes.
a 3% occupancy tax, Ontario County, for any hotels. And so we've been talking with the county as well to expand that to short-term rentals to kind of even the playing field as well. So then that 3% hotel tax would then
Apply to
apply
it.
to everyone.
The monies are also used for tourism, promoting the region.
It is.
It can be a very positive thing. But if you overprice a lodging tax, you place yourself at a competitive disadvantage. So you want to be careful. And I'll add, Lindsay is a really good resource because she studies this stuff on a national basis. This type of discussion isn't new. It's happening all around the world, not just around the country, but around the world, where vacation rentals are becoming a big part of communities. What's happening, which is really sad, is that some boards have a knee-jerk reaction to a problem. An owner like this who's mad as hell, and then they just ban the thing. And then we're seeing that in town as Barrick right now, right? They did it, and we're selling more homes in Barrick. So it's having an influence on property values. So there are right ways and wrong ways. Lindsay's a great resource for you. So, thank you.
I think we had these discussions with a lot of these people a few years ago. Same thing, but we opted to take a kind of a minimalist approach, just registration, just to get an idea for what's out there. We tended to always come back, but here we are, we came back.
you were gonna,
I was actually gonna say what he said too, that if it were to be a ban, there would be a bunch of properties that would go up for sale. And then also like what she said, like, oh, well, buy the property. Dave Hubble will reach out a lot to me or other investors that he knows and trusts, is like, hey, I have this property, the owner's not taking care of it, you want to reach out to them and offer to buy it. So that's something too, is like to have the relationship with the board or the enforcers with the current investors, of knowing the good ones and keeping the bad ones out of the area.
Lisa, did you want to say something?
Yeah, so I'm Lisa Fitzgerald. I'm a member of the community. I also have short-term rentals. And I just want to walk you through kind of what my business is like and for you to get an idea of who comes to the area. So my rentals, I focus on multi-generational stays. So we're looking at grandparents with their kids, with their grandkids. They all get to come together. It's huge because with the pandemic, also with grandparents, they don't want to stay with other people. Whenever they come, their kids, their grandkids, they've all been quarantined for weeks, they've been testing for weeks. So hosted stays, first of all, would be getting rid of that and there's still people that don't feel comfortable staying with others. And so anyways, those are my main visitors that come. And I have a farm and I focus on agritourism. So they come to the farm, they meet the animals, they learn about sustainability. I can't tell you how many times I hear this is once in a life opportunity. They see their kids working with animals. I send them to my neighbors' farms to get their chickens, their meat. I send them all to various farms for honey. They have this amazing agricultural experience. I send them to the local restaurants. All of my neighbors know me. We stay there periodically just to make sure everything is up to date. I have a full-time maintenance crew, full-time cleaning crew. We are at the property almost daily. and we meet every single group. And I don't live in the short-term rentals, but we are there, we're hands-on. And I think if you were to make it only hosted rentals, you're going to be taking away a really large part of what makes this place so special. And you're taking away those amazing interactions. And I know the statistic was, this is about 5 years old, it's probably increased, but I know from being on the tourism board for the county, they did a lot of research, and for every tourism dollar spent in the community, it's worth $2 of taxpayer money. So you are taking the burden off of the residents if it is done correctly. And so, like everyone here has been saying, we're for regulations. Airbnb actually has a rule, no events at all. If you have an event, your reservation's canceled, you're trespassing at that point, you're off the property. So anyone holding events that is through Airbnb, they're breaking Airbnb rules, and they can be pulled off of Airbnb as well. So all of my rentals, they have noise ordinance that we put on them. We say you cannot be making any noise after this time or before this time. And we are there, and we check with our neighbors on a regular basis, because it's an investment to the community if it's done correctly. And so anyone who wants to succeed and cares about the community is constantly checking up, making sure that it's done correctly. You don't want garbage out on your property. I mean, no, your guests don't want the garbage out on the property. You know, you want to take care of the places, and look at everyone here. We want to work with you, and we want regulation just as much as you, because all it takes is one bad owner to really give a bad rap for everyone. And we don't want that just as much as you don't want that. So we're here to be a resource for you, to be a sounding board, and we really want the same things that you do. So we're here to help make it as reasonable as possible to walk that tightrope of regulation versus not impeding upon, the community as well.
And I know you did not mean to say this, but not a bad owner, but an owner that's had a bad experience.
Correct, yes.
And I know that.
Right, like there's no bad dogs.
Anyone else here in the
Vanessa had another
room
comment.
that wants to
Jen.
say something?
I want to make a point that Airbnb as a platform has a lot of great rules. But when you have someone as my neighbor that is on 12 platforms, we called him when the problem started. And I said, my next call is to Airbnb. He goes, this listing was not through Airbnb. So apparently you can list on multiple platforms, and whatever platform your guest has gone through, those are the rules. So if everybody was on Airbnb and everybody abided by those rules, that'd be great. But when you have investments, marketing our area, how come this area is great to just slide in? This is what happens. 12 platforms, where are we going with that? And each platform has their own set of rules. So this is how this seemingly innocent thing is really he's schooled. They are all schooled on how to get around these little bitty nuances. And, I like Airbnb rules, but then you get into everything else, all the other platforms.
I have just one more thing, I'm sorry. Just as a proactive approach for you folks, because I've sat in many town board meetings, is you really do need to have the resources on board to do the follow-up, to do the paperwork. I don't want your gal on the end there to be totally overwhelmed, but it does take a substantial amount of resources in order to really enforce the regulations. I sit, unfortunately, South Bristol's a great example. You go to one of their town board meetings and it's just an hour of just applications. So Just kind of a forewarning there that having the resources on deck in order to move forward is gonna be necessary.
Anyone on the, online that wants to comment?
Yes, thank you. I want to echo a lot of the sentiments of others in the room. My name is Kara Elford. I'm a local resident as well as an unhosted owner, if you will. And I am absolutely for reasonable regulation because, again, I don't want to dismiss the poor experience that Vanessa has had. Certainly, we don't want that for anyone. And as a personal owner of the home that we're hosting, I don't want my house to be ruined or for there to be garbage all over to be picked up or anything like that. The last thing I want is for there to be a party within the home that we're hosting. We often have people reach out because we have a very large property, a large home with a lot of land behind it, asking to have a higher number of guests than we actually allow. And we often say that that's beyond what's allowed by our short-term rental permit. Now, they don't know that you in the town of Canandaigua don't heavily enforce that, but that's our easy way of essentially saying, no, we don't want to accept a reservation that we know could lead to trouble down the road. So I just want to go ahead and say that I encourage that regulation and absolutely, I think that the fee at this time compared to other towns is low, and I would be a proponent of increasing that fee if it would mean that there would be greater accessibility for us to continue to have short-term rentals in the area. Thank you.
Thank you.
That it?
Can I also add one thing?
Please.
So I try and really keep my finger on the pulse of short-term rentals. I try to encourage responsible rentals as well. And just putting this out there, there seems to be a major slowdown with a lot of more or less new rental owners. There's a shift coming, there's a correction. So this huge influx that you see, it's not sustainable for anyone, and you're going to see a drop in short-term rentals. And I just want to let you know that there are some people that have no rentals on the books for the next year. So it's coming. So don't feel like you're going to be growing at this rate. I think it has already reached its max, its peak, and we're coming down the other side. So the regulations you put in place are probably going to be the ones that are in it for the long run anyways. So just to keep that in mind.
I have another person that wants to.
Okay. Last one.
Amy?
Hi, I'm Amy Merrill, and I am an STR owner, property manager based in Naples, and a realtor as well. And so I agree, I definitely am seeing a shift. I wanted to point out, I am also co-founder of the Finger Lakes Vacation Rental Alliance with Lindsay. And we do have a Facebook page, and we've been having webinars that we've invited town boards, owners, and managers to. And so we would love to have you guys, watch our recorded webinar or attend one of the future ones as well, because we do want to work with all of the towns to come up with sustainable and regulations that make sense. As far as the rules that Vanessa, I believe, commented on, each platform does have its own rules, but the owners and managers also have a responsibility to create rules for their property and enforce them. So it's not necessarily a platform problem, it's an individual problem. In any type of real estate investment, you're going to have those outliers that are basically, like was mentioned, they're slumlords. They don't care. All they care about is what money they're bringing in. They're not willing to improve properties or have rules. And I think fortunately that is more of the exception to the rule. One of the towns, I believe Hammondsport, has on their short-term regulations that if a property is not a hosted property, that it must be managed by someone local. For them, it's within the same county. And I know of other townships that have similar regulations. So that might be something instead of hosted, where you have that, there should be somebody, and South Bristol has this as well. Someone needs to be local to the point that they could be there within a certain amount of time frame if there were an emergency.
Well, did you have something you wanted to add, Doug?
Yeah, I do. Just two quick things just for everybody to think about, and I know we're trying to wrap up. Many of you know, I also serve on the board of directors of the New York Planning Federation. We are seeing across the state and actually across the country, Lindsay had mentioned a very good point. If we were to switch to this concept of hosted, that is a change of use. And we are starting to see quite a few municipalities ending up in a legal dynamic because they essentially then have a pre-existing non-conforming situation, right? Because if you're currently have a unhosted allowance basically to happen and you enact a new use law for hosted, then they could say, well, we're pre-existing non-conforming and we don't have to apply, right? And so we're starting to see that. So just keep that in the back of your mind. But the other thing, and there's been a lot of great comments here today about sensible regulations, and she even mentioned the sustainable. The example that Vanessa used, that property does have one of our short-term rental permits. And guess what? There's no violation of our current town code. And when they make application, we will issue a new permit in January based on the current code. And that's why it goes exactly back to what Terry said. Terry said we started at a minimalistic. We absolutely did. All this was a registration. There's not even a violation section other than if you don't get a permit, right? So now that's where this needs to go, right? Is the rest of that.
Absolutely. I mean, that's what I'm hearing. Is, yeah. So first, I want to thank all of our guests. Your comments were wonderful, and we really appreciate them. And I apologize. I'm sorry that you have difficulties that you do, and Don, I know your difficulties, and it's very unfortunate. And we need to come up with a way to address them, and we will. I'm confident of that. And I'd like to thank everybody that's joining us online. Also, we appreciate your feedback and participation, and I think we need to digest what we've heard and kind of explore it with some open dialogue at our next meeting. And I think that probably will consume our next meeting.
Easily.
Yeah. So, and I invite you all back to participate at our next meeting, which is the first Monday in the new year.
I think, well, that's a holiday,
It is,
so
isn't it? So
we're gonna
let's
have
talk
to
about
set that.
That's the second.
Yeah, we're close that day.
The town is closed?
Yes.
Close the whole town.
Town is shut down.
The town shut down.
So the 9th, do you want to do the 9th at 9?
Roll up the streets.
The 9th at
9 o'clock.
9 o'clock. That works.
Yeah, I'll let
Yep.
Jean know.
And again, thank you all. Appreciate it very much. And do I have a motion to adjourn?
So moved.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Thank you all. We'll see you. Have a Merry Christmas and a Happy New Year for those of you that we don't see. And thanks again.
Thank you, everybody, for
Thank
coming.
you.
Please
Thanks, folks.
feel free to
Great.
share your contact information